Hello, everybody. Welcome. We'll get started in a couple minutes.
Oh, well, I'm sure she's good.
Hello, everybody. Good to see so many familiar faces. Some of you, this is your very first call. Some of you have only been with Best Buddies a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So welcome. That's always exciting. We give it one more minute as the number keeps creeping up. Hey, Chris, what do you think? Should we kick things off?
Yeah, we can go ahead and get started. We'll keep letting people in.
Sounds great. Well, welcome everybody to our Q3 call, all jobs training call with Cornell University.
Uh-oh. I'm sorry.
If you're, no, it's okay. If you could mute yourself, that would be fantastic. We got a really great training today on job coaching and training techniques. Just a couple housekeeping pieces. If you are not able to attend all this training or have to leave for some reason, or you have someone on your team who could make it out today, this training will be recorded and uploaded into Buds. If you have any questions about accessing any of those trainings on Buds, feel free to reach out to me. It's a brand new kind of setup we're doing this year. So with all brand new things, sometimes there's little wrinkles in the fabric. So just let me know if you've run into any issues. Thank you all for those of you who have been attending your Q3 calls with your field teams, with the national jobs team. Those have been incredible, and we just really appreciate all of you sharing your goals and your challenges to kind of move the needle forward with jobs around the country, which has been really exciting. Another announcement would be we're going to be running our Q3 data reports early in October. So make sure you get your activity records and your job placement info and setworks up to date, so that data can reflect what's really happening in your state. And finally, if your name says Best Buddies on your Zoom account, if you could just put in the chat your name so I can make sure I get everybody's name for attendance. So that way I can mark this as complete for your annual training. But again, we have a wonderful training today on job coaching and training techniques, which I think will be really beneficial for everybody. I want to welcome all of our new staff. Some of you are starting this week. There's a couple other folks on this call that have started this last month. So welcome. These are quarterly trainings we do with Cornell. And today I have just the deep pleasure and honor of introducing our speakers today, Jeffrey and Nadine. Jeffrey and Nadine, maybe you could just briefly introduce yourselves for those of us that are new on this call. And with that, I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and get us started with the intro and introduce myself, and I'll let Jeffrey talk about himself. But my name is Aideen Carhan, and I'm an extension associate at Cornell. I am a Caucasian female with long dark brown hair and blue eyes. And my background is kind of by trade of the who I am is I best describe myself as a social worker, and I have worked in a variety of different settings throughout my career, and always with people, different age groups. But I landed in 2016 with Cornell with a focus on employment and disability, and a lot of work with individuals who are experiencing mental health symptoms and other types of disability alongside or as their primary disability. And I am super excited to be here today with all of you. And Kim and I were with some of you in person in July, but it's been a minute since then. And then I think we did another challenging conversations training, but we've missed you all. So Jeffrey and I are happy to be here today. So Jeffrey, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, why not? Thank you, Aideen. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeffrey Tamburo. I'm also an extension associate here at the Yang Tan Institute at Cornell University. In a sense, Aideen and I are trainers. It's a big part of what we do. And I have been working here at Cornell for about 10 years now. But prior to that, just by way of self-introduction, I spent many, many years as an employment service professional, like all of you here. I was a job coach and I was a job developer. I think my title was employment consultant. I was director of employment for an organization here in New York, upstate New York. I live in Syracuse, New York, which is where I am right now. And, a lot of what I talk about, this job coach training, is a piece of what we're together a couple hours, a much longer training that I do on job coaching. But a lot of what I talk about comes from either I'll draw from my own stories and experiences from meeting with hundreds of employment professionals over the years. And then the science of what we do is, what does the literature say? What does the research say? What are the best practices? We were just talking before we started here about, this whole concept we talk about the science, the best practices and research, and blending that with the art, right? Which is who we are and our personalities and our own individual style and what we bring to this work. I love that we have a lot of new people because it means everything I talk about is new, right? And so we're glad you're here, and there will be multiple opportunities in this session for you all to engage in the chat or the Q&A, and we really encourage you to do that, especially with this training, because it really does make for a much more interesting time together. So thank you.
Yeah, and just a little bit by way of introduction, this is some information about the Yang Tan Institute, where Jeffrey and I come from within Cornell. And basically the focus and the vision of the Yang Tan is to work towards full inclusion and participation of people with disabilities in the workplace and in the larger community. So you're going to hear that element today of just how to be inclusive in everything that we do and give dignity to individuals so that they don't stand out as being, somebody with a disability, as being different from everybody else, but they're just part of the community. And so we're excited to be here and, represent the Yang Tan Institute where we come from. So
All right. Well, thank you, Aideen.
it goes on with you. Yeah.
It does. So there's a slide up here right now that says resources, and a few different boxes with words in them. And essentially, these are some resources that I believe we'll be sending you after the training. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention so that when I'm talking about certain concepts or actually bringing up some resources, you'll know that you will have access to them. So one is you'll have access to this PowerPoint. Um, I forget if you get it before or after, but you will have the PowerPoint if you don't. We're going to talk about the concept of a task analysis, as job coaches or what have you, as employment professionals. And I have a resource related to that. When you think of job coaching, you think of what's in the middle here, training techniques, I think sometimes we default to certain training techniques that seem most obvious and most common, but there's a whole a manual, a shortish manual that has a variety of training techniques with sort of tips and suggestions, to help us just think a bit more expansively about what it is that we do and how we do it, particularly when, as we were saying, we're out in the community with people and we're trying to balance okay, I'm here to offer support because someone needs the support, but at the same time, how do I sort of continue to preserve and enhance someone's dignity and independence, right? It's any job coach knows there's a tightrope walk with that. And then there's also a fading. And every good job coach knows that eventually you're fading and you're not going to be there as frequently in most cases. And so we actually have a resource about fading gracefully, and we'll talk about fading today as well. So I want to start us out. I told you I'm going to ask you to engage, but this is easy, with a couple polling questions because, we really like to know a little bit about you. And so I believe Alex is going to launch this poll in a second here on your screen. But the question for you, there it is. So there's the poll. What is the length of time you've been in your job or your position? 0 to 1 years, 2 to 3 years, 4 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, or 11 to 100 years, right? So we'll give this a minute for people to type your response. We do not see who responds what, but we get a percentage. We see, like right now, I see 30 people have responded out of 50 or 62%. We like for everyone to do it if possible. Just another way to engage with you other than just us talking at you. All right. I can't leave these open too long because I don't want to hold up the training, but I'll give it just another few seconds here. And if you don't see the poll or for whatever reason, you can always type in the chat and there's the Q&A feature as well. Lots of ways to communicate. All right, I'm going to have to bring this down. So I'm going to do a 3, 2, 1. Okay, share the results. So kind of true to what we were talking about before. 57% of you, or 21 people out of our 30-something folks here today, say you've been in your job less than a year. So good, welcome. 16%, just a few of you said 2 to 3 years. Just 3 people said 4 to 5 years, and then we have 7 that said 6 to 10 years. So I appreciate you sharing that. And and I didn't get real specific on this, but one of the things that I like to remind us of as we go through this is that, and especially for all of you, the 57% that said you're new or newish, is that no matter how long you've been in this job or this field, you have something to bring. You have something to offer, right? In fact, sometimes people that are newer, I have found, rather than us seasoned vets, have kind of a fresh perspective and a new way of looking at things. I remember very clearly many years ago, I'm not going to tell you how many, being a young job coach, no experience with job coaching, in seeing things that being really green, I didn't have a lot of experience, but seeing some things in the field with job coaching that I questioned were really beneficial. And we're going to talk a lot more about that as we go throughout today. Okay, the next question I want to ask you, and this is the last poll for now, and this is, Alex will bring this one up as well, is what is your primary job function in your job? Now, there are multiple examples here, so hear me out. There it is, it's on the screen. You might want to wait to hear them all first. Are you a job coach? Are you a job developer? Do job development, intake and assessment, evaluation, supervisor, manager, coordinator, or I wear too many hats just to choose one. We'll give it a minute. Okay. Usually people choose the first one, job coach, and then once they realize that there's other choices, you can switch your answer, I think. All right. Oh, we got about 34, 36 people. Give it a few more in case you want to respond. Feel free to type in the chat or the Q&A if you want to share anything about what you do, especially those of you, whether it's something different or you do multiple things. Okay. Gonna count down. 3, 2, 1. To end the poll, share the results. So over a quarter of you said I'm a job coach. Small amount, 10% said job development. 7 people said I'm a supervisor, a manager, a coordinator, whatever title, director, whatever. And then nearly half of us said I wear too many hats just to choose one. For those of you that say you wear too many hats, anyone want to share what hat you wear? Maybe, is there certain things that you do? Love to hear about it in the chat or the Q&A. I think you can also unmute your mic if you want to speak. So don't be shy about doing that. But anyone that wears more than one hat, feel free to share a little bit about what hat you wear. I'll tell you, when I was in the role of employment professional, employment consultant, I think was my title, I would have checked job coach. I would have checked job developer. I would have checked I wear too many hats. Eventually, I would have checked supervisor. Right. Because eventually I was a supervisor. So let's see. Pam is a supervisor, developer, coach. Always have that handful of participants. I didn't have a caseload when I was a supervisor, but we were kind of talking to Chris about this, before we went live here about I would cover people sometimes in the field, I would be the natural backup. Sean, do you wear every single one? Yeah. All right. We're going to say something, Nadine?
No, I was just going to help you out with the chat, but you got it.
Yeah, you know me, multitasker.
Oh, we got another one.
Go for
Andrew
it.
says employment consultant, job developer, strengths committee, accessibility officer, office assistant, and IT.
Oh my, Andrew, that's more than I ever did. Well, maybe there's formal and informal roles. I guess it depends on how you define it, right? Well, thank you for that. So again, I guess what I want to say here is that no matter what your job title is, you know, we are all, even the office assistant, bear with me. We are all job coaches, right? Because we all, interact with people in our communities, we interact with people with disabilities. And when we're out at those job sites in some way, shape, or form as a job coach, we are sort of the face of our organizations as well. So, in some way, shape, or form, this is something that all of us do in some way, whether or not we have that formal title of job coach. It's a really important role. And so, it says here the essential job coach. I want to talk for a couple minutes here about why the role is so important and maybe get some of your perspectives on that as well. So there's a what I guess I would call on screen right now a schematic diagram, that and it's an illustration here that um, technically it's what we might call, and if you've been to our trainings before, sometimes you may have seen this, what we might call the phases or steps of the supported employment process. I have supported employment here in parentheses because the reality is no matter what service we're doing or what service we're providing, in some way, shape, or form, we have a process, right? And in supported employment, it will start often with receiving some sort of referral and having some sort of intake where we get to know somebody. Now, whether or not it's you or someone else in your organization, there's some sort of starting process. And I know you have a very robust process at Best Buddies. And then, one of the things, and we've done classes for all of you on this, courses on this, and it's in red, is a process of assessment, right? We've done training on the importance of getting to know the job seeker, spending time with them prior to the next steps, which are job development, job placement, right? In yellow, it says, and these are the steps I think we often associate with this class, which would be job coaching, obviously, fading from, obviously, we're fading our job coaching supports eventually. And, for some of you, it'll be providing ongoing or extended services and supported employment or what have you. We may associate those steps with this job coaching class, but the reality is, if I were to go back for a minute, we have assessment in red, right? If we don't spend time doing a good assessment, getting to know the job seeker, we are not going to be as successful with what is employment services all about? The job match, right? And ultimately, the more we get to know someone, which leads to a better job match. And by the way, in the job development class we talk about the more we get to know the employer and the business and their needs, the better that job match, which means it's going to improve, our job coaching services. It may even minimize the amount of job coaching services, a good job match. So, I know the illustration here with all the different steps kind of gives the appearance that these are all separate and distinct steps. And yes, I will say that I think it's important to really spend time getting to know people in some process of assessment before we really, really start actively engaging in that job search. Because how can we help someone get a job, especially someone with a significant disability, if we don't know who they are, right, and where they've been? And so, but it's not necessarily the case that these are all distinct steps and phases, because think of this partly like quilt pieces. And I'm not a quilter. I'm sure someone here is, it's not me, right? But each connects to the others. And without a certain step or square, there'd be a big hole, right? So every step in the process, in some way, whether it's you, whether it's someone else, is necessary to really build that solid foundation for that quality job match. I always say everything we do is about job match, right? That quality job match that will have a strong possibility of leading to what is our goal? Long-term job retention, a satisfying employment situation for the supported employee and for the business and the employer as well. And so each phase or each step in the diagram impacts our job coaching services in some way, right? So, okay. All right. So I have a chat question for you. And on the screen right now, and you're going to see this a few times today, or I will let you know when it's there. So I never want to assume anyone sees our images. There's a couple of chat bubbles. One is like blue and one is sort of, I'm bad with colors, like orange or rust colored. I'm terrible with colors. And so that usually is an indicator that I'm going to ask you to type something in the chat or the Q&A. So what I want you to do is think back to your very first job, whatever that might be. Some of us have to think a lot harder than others. In that job, who made a difference in that job and why, right? Who helped you be successful? Type in the Q&A or the chat. Or the group chat, what your thoughts are. If you don't want everyone to see your name, if you're being shy, if you type your comment just to me or Adine, I'm Jeffrey, we will see your comment, but not everyone will, and we would just share your comment. But otherwise, share with everybody. Your very first job, who made a difference on that very first job? And why and how? Right? Manager. Yeah, it's a key role, isn't it? Anyone else? How many we got here? We got 57 people. I know it takes a minute. We trainers get very impatient, but we realize it takes a minute to type your comments in. To
So
deal with
Becca
those
says-
silences, Adine. I try to deal with those silences. I still don't do it very well after all these years, but I try, I swear.
So Becca says, my first job was when I was 14. I was in a customer service role for Plaster Fun Time. I conducted the birthday parties and worked with all the walk-ins. My store manager was the key person to help me grow and learn. He was one of 3 others I worked with during that year in the job. And
Okay,
then,
yeah.
yep. Then we have the manager and the coworker. My mom prepared me, waitress in a small restaurant, a coworker. Everyone. I was a youth activist. The team, Circuit City was the first job. My coworker had been there longer with more patient in calm than me at 17. Old boss, my coworkers, my supervisor, coworkers, and most of all the customers. Customer feedback, if good, makes all the difference to the business and the quality of work. My coworker slash trainer. And then I was a guest experience specialist for a hospital, fancy name for an info desk attendant. My coworker, then supervisor Larry, provided a lot of life and work wisdom.
Oh, this is great. And Nicole, I love that business focused comment about customer feedback. I always say all roads lead to job development. I know that's not our training today, but and Matthew, you want to read Matthew's? Go ahead.
Yep. Matthew worked in a shoe store. One of my coworkers would remind me it was okay to laugh and have fun on the job. We had a good team and got work done quickly. It helped work go by quickly.
Awesome. What do y'all notice about these comments? Because I notice one really, really, really pervasive theme. And when I do this, this is typically what I notice about these comments. Although I don't know this is why I even did do this exercise. It's funny, things we learn as we go. Do you notice anything about the comments, 18? Because I noticed
Natural
one real,
supports.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's really, really apparent for all of us that, the role of, the supports that we have are so important in a job, right? They're often the reasons that people, any of us, think about jobs you've had or people you know that have left jobs. So often it's because whether it's just the person doesn't connect to the work culture or the environment or something about the people, and people will stay in jobs because they have a friend at work, right? And that level of support. And we're going to talk about natural supports today and how important those coworker collegial supports are and where your role, our, I say our, I don't do the job anymore, but I still think that I do in my head, right? Where your role comes in when it comes to helping to facilitate those natural supports. You also make me think that in the early stages, if we were to go back to our schematic diagram, because we're getting to know somebody and what's important to them before the job, before we actively land the job, we really do need to start thinking about some of those work culture, work environment factors. I know they're not as easy to read. It's not going to be written per se in a job description, because we're not natural supports. We're paid supports. We have an important role, but there is a distinction, right, between what we do and those natural supports. Any other comments, Adine?
Yeah, we've got a few more. My manager offered me several opportunities to sit in on meetings, introduced me to senior leadership, and treated me like a valued colleague. I was the only mascot slash Easter bunny for our local mall. That's a good tidbit. But she really pushed for me to get involved with other event coordination. Somebody else says it was their supervisor. She helped me understand my role, was very welcoming, and provided great feedback to help ensure success, which led to job satisfaction. And then Brittany said, the center director, she shared that she saw a lot of potential in me and pushed me to go for higher positions and travel, constantly empowered me throughout the growth. And then my first job was actually a PCA for my aunt with IDD, and it's what drove me to my current career path. She taught me patience and helped me find my passion for helping people. And then last one is I worked as a valet at a fancy country club. The best tip I ever got was from an elderly couple who drove an old car. I had their car waiting and opened the doors for them, and they tipped me $20. I think they felt that I valued them despite not being rich or beautiful.
Oh, that's great, Sandra. My social justice self just loves that comment. So thank you for sharing that, right? And, when we think about that, starting a job, the first day of work, right? You and the job seeker really do have to prepare for that first day. I talk about sometimes how important it is to help prepare the job seeker for the world of work. Sometimes we're working with people that have not had prior work history, or maybe the prior work history hasn't necessarily been positive, and so, just things like what do I wear? I can remember even for myself when I started some new jobs being really, really very focused on, oh my gosh, I don't know what the dress code is. What do I have to wear? Just sometimes the elemental things that we might not even think about, right? Or, who do I report to? Do I have to bring a lunch or some sort of meal? Where do people eat lunch? I remember being very focused on that, right? It's that transition from non-working, someone who isn't working, to balancing life in a work schedule can be daunting. And what I love about your comments too, about what you talked about, and some of this too, is it really does break down those walls of what I call us versus them, meaning, we all have had experiences, and, like you talk about colleagues, coworkers, others, stories that supported you in work, right? It's no different necessarily for people that we support. I mean, people we support might need some additional accommodations, or certainly have faced perhaps, discrimination and other types of factors that certainly are very important to address and be aware of. But, when it comes down to it, it's those relationships, it's job match, it's finding work that you enjoy and you love that you're able to do with supports, right? It's a lot of the things that we talk about today are relevant to all of us and not just people that we support. So I always try to avoid that.
Yeah, and then one more comment came in from
Yeah.
Nicole saying, I've always been trained or mentored to teach and lead in a way that those employees feel like they have all the tools to do my job and can be there over time.
Yeah. Sounds like a supervisor I'd want to have, Nicole. That's great. And so thinking about the first day of the job, right? The things that need to be in place. Do we have a formal plan? Do we have a training plan, or do we just kind of know, right? Are we documenting these things? Are we reviewing these things with people that we support, maybe even the employer? It might be, just the reminders and prompts for preparing for my workday, for someone's workday. The big T, transportation to and from the work site. We all know that is something that's been around since the day I started working in this field. It's here today, and we'll be talking about transportation probably long after I'm retired from this field because it's significant, right? If you can't get to the job, you're not going to be able to do the job. Are there other just balancing the person's life, right, in the transition process? Are there other services they have, other supports they have? Are there things that they're doing, maybe household responsibilities that need to sort of be figured out? I've had people I worked with that did babysitting for people in their family, and that became a challenge when all of a sudden the person got a job and trying to negotiate all of that. Do we have a formal transition checklist of who's responsible, who's doing what in this process, right? So, next question, I have a few questions in a row here, and there's those chat bubbles again. And I call this job coaching do's. What is the role of a job coach? Sounds like such an easy question, right? But it's the one of the fundamental questions here today. Actually, this one and the next question on the next slide. What do you see your role as, whatever your title is, right? So let's not get hung up on job titles. What do you see your role as a job coach, or the role as a job coach? Or if you were going to be a job coach? See, no one has an out. What is the role of a job coach? We'll give you a minute. Yeah, that integration is a key word, David, right? Integration into the community. Sometimes I talk about the distinction between integration, and there's a formal definition of that. According to the Rehabilitation Services Administration, there's the Science RSA. And then there's inclusion, like true social inclusion, which is a whole different thing. Related, but different. So, but absolutely, our job, and if you do supported employment, the role is it's integration because people have often not been a part of their communities or part of the fabric of the workforce, right? And I bet you have to document examples of integration. What does it look like? Prepare, assist, guide. Here they come. Eventually they come fast and furious.
I'll help you
This
out.
is where I call you in, Adine.
Yep. Responsible for helping individuals with IDD to integrate employment and find and succeed in meaningful employment, help the best buddies members strengthen their self-advocacy in the workplace, guidance, education, and empowerment, introducing the participants to the workplace, train on company culture and assist with job training and make certain they have the tools to be successful, provide opportunities and continuous support for people looking for jobs. And that's it.
All the above, right? There's no wrong answer here. I like that Kim was talking about, as we already kind of said, training on company culture. It's those unwritten rules, right? That aren't going to necessarily, how do we learn about company culture and those unwritten rules of work? I bet for most of us, or many of us, we've learned through having a variety of different life and work experiences, particularly for me, work experiences, where I learned on the job about things that aren't in my job description. In the past, I remember learning about, I still am learning about it in our job today, things like conflict resolution, right? Teamwork, right? A lot of those soft skills and things that we might talk about that aren't going to be formally listed, but are things that we have to learn in some way, shape, or form to be successful in the workplace.
All right, we got some more. You want to hear some more?
Yeah, I do.
To assist with ensuring the success of a participant professionally, whether they get the job or not. Integration, encouragement, therapist, advocate who helps with the establishment of independence and job retention, support and empowerment in the workplace, and also to educate the employer.
That is a huge role, educating the employer, right? It's so important maybe it's about the job seeker we're working with. Maybe it's about what our services and supports are about, right? Because if we're just there sort of hanging around and people don't know who we are, Is that really beneficial or does it get in the way? Right? Which actually leads us to our next thought. And someone said therapist. I would say that I don't know your role. There might someone be, if we're actually a clinician versus do we provide small c counseling and support, right? I always try to, I remember always trying to figure out that line between where does my role of offering support and guidance and advice or whatever stop, and then where does it sort of start to spill over into I might need to pass this on to a professional like you, Adine. I don't know where that line would be when it comes to a job coach. You have any thoughts on that? Because I know you
Well,
talk about all this stuff a lot in your trainings.
I mean, I think part of it is your own wellness. I mean, I think that sometimes you are in a role where you're hearing things that a therapist would absolutely hear sometimes because you're that trusted person. But I think it's oh my goodness, what do I do with this feeling of recognizing, gosh, no, but I mean, it's even when I'm sitting with somebody and my job is to sit there and be a therapist with them for the 45 minutes or hour that I'm with them, and that's solely what I'm focused on. I'm overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of somebody just like bringing their problems to me and feeling this need to fix them. And so I feel like when you're trying to juggle it with all these other job responsibilities, that would be a lot. And it would be, difficult to feel like, gosh, I have the time and space, like headspace I need for this. So I think it's kind of just balance, like being able to nicely say, thanks for sharing that. We're on the way to a job interview right now, or hey, we're in a public place and I can't really talk about this. But I want to be able to support this. And hey, how about we talk about how I can connect you to some services or something like that? Because I think it can become like, if you become that comfortable person, it can slip into somebody coming to you with things that might be a lot for, your role beyond what your skill set is, or, just you might feel like you just don't have the best answers for them. And it could be true, that you don't, and that's okay. So it's just, yeah, I don't know that there's no like clean answer,
No one
but
answer, yeah.
yeah. And therapist is used so different. We use therapists for recreational therapists and whatever. So I think that in itself just implies talking and, listening to
Sure.
somebody and what's going on in their life. So it doesn't have to be that you're acting like a mental health therapist, but it brings up a good point of that balance of how to delineate what falls within your role and what doesn't.
Yeah, well, in my understanding challenge behaviors class that I teach, we talk about, knowing what supports we can provide, and then there might be some longer term supports that people need, like counseling or like a social skills group or something that is maybe beyond what we do. And I have no doubt, knowing best buddies and all the years I've worked with you and, working with all of you, that there are times that you will make those referrals to those professionals when someone may need it, right? That's sort of one of those elements and signs of a good job coach, as well as having some sense of that, knowing what our role is, right? So I mean, there's so much that a job coach does. We're assessing, we're really assessing at work, when we're out in the community. Even though someone's already got the job coaching is this, in a sense, assessment, right? It's helping sort of figure out, because you're out there, you're on your own. The Lone Ranger, I used to feel like, as a job coach, and having to make all these snap decisions in the moment and assessments of what's going on, having to be quick on my feet, right? We might be job skill training, social skill training, or doing a lot of observation. A big part of a job coach is observing. I've been the job coach sitting there kind of from afar, observing what's going on when someone's gotten more comfortable and the coworkers come up and say, "Oh, it must be nice to have a job where you can just sit down." Ha ha. I never thought that was funny, but I get their point, right? Because they didn't, really understand the role of what we do when we fade, right? We're gonna have, contact with a variety. We are, and there's a slide that gets to this, the person that is the bridge, at least at some point, to a whole bunch of different people in their lives. And I have a slide that talks to that in a few minutes. We'll talk about facilitating natural supports, right? And then any other services that someone might need, as we've addressed. Just a few things up on this slide about job coaching dues, and then I'm going to ask you another question on the next slide. We have to know a lot. Job coach has to have a lot of tools in their toolkit, right? We have to understand employer needs, right? And I think it's easy to, and I get it, it's easy to forget when we talk about a job coach in our role that we're also there for the employer. I mean, I know we're there primarily to support the now supported employee, but we're also, and this is maybe my, all roads lead to job development is, in business engagement, it's to remember that we're also there to support what the employer needs. What are their needs? What are their pain points in the workplace? How can we go about doing that? So employer needs are, and I think that happens naturally to some extent for many of us. I would argue that it's equal, right? We're there because anything we do to support I keep saying job seeker, the employee also is supporting the employer if we're doing our job right, right? We're mentoring, we're modeling, right? And I mean, modeling can even be one of those systematic training techniques in the resource I told you that I'm going to go through later. But who else are we mentoring and modeling for? I know we think of ourselves as mentoring the employee, right? Who needs to learn their job, or connecting them to a workplace mentor from the work site. We might be modeling for not only the employee, but other people in the workplace who are watching us, right? Well, like it or not, people watch and observe how we're interacting with somebody, and it could be, an indicator of how, it sends a message. Everything we do in that job site, every action we take, every word we say sends a message to people, whether it's customers in the business, if it's that kind of business, or whether it's coworkers, supervisors, about how we might interact with someone who, assuming they even know, happens to have a disability, right? Shouldn't be any different, but that sometimes people will look at it that way. We, again, to the business end, we need to know are we training to the business standard, to the employer and industry standard? Do we understand? Again, it's back to understanding those employer needs as well. Yeah, we really do. Matthew, I say that about modeling because I can specifically remember as a job coach, it was a long time ago, but it's been a few years. But I specifically remember being a job coach and coworkers and people I didn't always necessarily know at first. I remember one time I was job coaching someone in the beginning pretty intensively, before we faded. And I actually had a coworker come up to me later, and I forgot how it came about, and say, "Oh, you mean it's okay for me to go talk to them?" And I thought to myself, "Oh my gosh, I'm not doing my job right if that's what I didn't intend to message that, but somehow that was the message, the unspoken message that perhaps was being delivered, right? Through, so maybe there wasn't enough work up front, maybe my role wasn't explained up front to coworkers, colleagues, supervisors, right? So that they fully understood. And we can't always trust that, or we can't always be assured that the manager or the person that hires is necessarily going to convey the message, right? I'm sure many of you know that. So we end up having to sort of explain that. We're going to talk, systematic instruction. I've mentioned that more than once. We'll get to that. Someone mentioned advocacy or self-advocacy, right? I mean, we need to know about advocacy. We may be providing advocacy. There could be a time and a place for that, or even perhaps arguably more importantly, teaching someone, or it might even just be encouraging someone to find their voice, to advocate and speak up for themselves, whatever it might be. Could be something seemingly small, could be a big thing, right? And for some people, that's not a problem. And for other people, it will take time and energy and effort, right? To learn to find your voice, particularly if you've perhaps your whole life had other people speaking for you, not had to do a lot of things for yourself, right? Not been in the world of work where you really understand what your role is and what you can and can't say, right? I'm going to talk about a task analysis eventually here and doing that and what that might look like. We're capturing evidence. I'm assuming you all are documenting things, and you want to capture evidence of integration and of job satisfaction. And then even when we're not documenting, we're sort of, I'm pointing to my head, kind of, we're like detectives gathering those clues, right? And information that might be helpful, and things to know. Well, who might be a good natural support in this work site? Or gee, I'm noticing that this group tends to stay to themselves, not interact with anyone else. What do I do about that? Where where do people go and congregate? You know, is that something that I can help facilitate for the person that I'm working with? You know, the boss, is the boss more hands-on or a bit more distant, right? Do employees talk about the boss in a negative way or a positive way? You know, all these things we have to sort of gather and piece together. We have to do a lot of things, right? We have to analyze, break down tasks, teach, train, support someone's, self-evaluation. Oops, sorry about that. There we go. We have to plan, we have to report. All this to say that the job coach is a really important role and not one that we should minimize. Okay, this is the reverse question to chat bubbles on screen again, which means type in the chat or Q&A or whatever. What isn't the role of a job coach? Now, I know it seems like it is just the opposite of what we just talked about, and it may or may not be, but in some ways, I think this is an even more important question. What isn't the role of the job coach, right? Remember, I told you when I started in this field, I saw people doing things that I wondered how beneficial they were necessarily. Parenting, yeah, we're not people's parents, absolutely. It is not our role. Support, sure. Therapist, speaking of therapists, right? Knowing when to draw that line. Thank you, Allie.
Sandra
Oh,
had to do the
go
job
ahead.
for them too. Yeah, so we don't want to do the job for them.
Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, we can say that, we can know that, and then in the moment, sometimes it becomes difficult. We're going to talk about some fading pitfalls later, things that can get in our way, right? Doing the job for them. Like, is there a time where we might? One strategy is modeling how a job is done so someone sees how it's done. That's not really doing the job. It's a strategy. It's a technique. But doing the job for them when they very clearly can do it themselves um, is something we have to be aware of.
We've got Uber driver, finance/benefits counselors in our program, at least, they said, to be their manager instead of their actual manager, providing training on their specific job tasks. Kathy DeRusso is the exception. Medical doctor taking on the role with medication, and relationship counselor.
Yeah, all sorts of things, right? We have to be careful about, right? Yeah, then certainly aren't their medical doctor. Um, You know, providing training on job tasks, I think it would depend on the job and the situation, as much as possible. I always used to say we want to supplement. I would tell employers supplement the training they provide, and if it would depend, right? I would say providing training might depend, but feel free to add more to that. We are not the person's manager, supervisor, and that can be a line that can be very easily, even if we don't intend it, somehow that someone could view it that way, and we want to be careful not to be in that situation. Um, and a job coach is not a benefits counselor unless you have that training, right? Unless you have that training, knowing when to refer someone to a benefits counselor is critical. Absolutely. So, you said many of them that people talk about. We're not employed by the employer. Yeah, we do not work. We are not an employee of the business, right? Our in sort of it's important to be able to draw that distinction as well. Thank you, Nicole. Right. So, we don't do for people, we do with people, being careful not to cut corners, right? And, a job coach also should try to avoid using, what might be negative or deficit-based language. This goes back to job development again. Think about the message we're sending. How are we presenting people and their abilities, to employers? Right? Are we talking about what people can do? Accommodations is something that we um, may need to introduce to a job site or advocate for or speak up about. How do we present an accommodation? Are we presenting it as a productivity tool, as I sometimes say, or something that will help enhance the person's productivity, or acclimation to the job site? Or are we presenting it in another way, right? All these things we have to think about as job coaches, because again, doing for the person, and this is going back to when I was a job coach, I remember very clearly colleagues of mine that were seasoned, had been in the field way longer than me, that I saw doing the work beyond just what would be typical of a job coach. And I remember being young and kind of nervous and kind of unsure and thinking, this doesn't feel right, right? it's sending the message somehow that the person can't do the job for themselves, right? But it's easier. Sometimes it's just easier to, we're doers, we want to help, right? But of course, if we're doing the work for someone regularly, it's really not helping, it's hindering. So, and actually, what I just described leads us to the very next slide, which is talking about this concept for a minute of learned helplessness. So there's an image here of three turtles, who are kind of peeking out of their shells, right? And so I have to tell you that I told you I do a kind of a much longer version of a job coach training. And I found when I was revising that full day job coach training a few months ago that I had nothing in it, at least on a slide formally, about learned helplessness. And I thought, it's really important to just pause for a minute here and remind us that this concept of learned helplessness may have been the reality for some individuals with disabilities that you support, right? That is some of the things we started to talk about here. Maybe they experienced situations where other people did things for them, whether it's work or other parts of their life, or spoke for them, where the person didn't find their own voice or have diminished expectations of them, right? One example is that, those meetings where everyone else does the talking and the person doesn't do the talking themselves. So the person might learn to be passive, to not engage. Sometimes I even call that learned passivity, right? That this concept of learned helplessness, can result from persistent failure, traumatic events in someone's life. I was saying to Adine yesterday, losing multiple jobs, right? Or being told that you can't work or don't need to work, because of your disability, send those messages, in a sense, is traumatic. And Adine, I don't know if you have anything to add about, the whole concept of learned helplessness. So I know you talk about this a lot as well, in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the world of cognitive therapy, it's linked to your self-efficacy,
Oh, Adine
your belief that
froze.
you can or can't do something.
Okay.
And it's for some people, for you and I, on a given day, if we haven't experienced the same type of barriers as some individuals who faced a lot of barriers, we might just be like, oh, I can't do this today, but that's okay, because I know that I can do other things, or, this is the exception. For some people, they've experienced just adversity and trauma through their whole life and their schema. So the way that they, like, if you think of it as a lens that goes over everything they look at, they might see as I can't do, I'm not enough, I'm not that, in a way that is about their value, not just about this one thing. It's kind of pervasive about everything. And so as a job coach, even though you're not their therapist, helping them to find something that they can do and proving that mental schema as being, giving them evidence that, oh, maybe the way that I view myself isn't completely true. There are some things I can do, can kind of shift people out of the totally negative, like, way of viewing themselves to a more positive. So it can actually then give them confidence to try other things. And so it's part of cognitive therapy. It's looking at what negative thoughts do people have. So asking somebody, hey, what do you see about yourself, and kind of the why of, oh, why don't you think you can do this task, is a good way of getting people to just start asking themselves that about other things in their life too. And it shifts their thinking. So it can kind of actually rewire the brain for people who have experienced a lot of adversity and trauma towards more positive. They actually, I was telling Jeffrey, I have seen it referred to as learned hopefulness, replacing learned helplessness. Like, I'm hopeful that even if I can't do this now, with the right support and skill building, I can do things later that are important to me.
Yeah, thank you, Adine. And you made me think about when I talk about motivation and we talk about some different things, they talk about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. I think of skills mastery, right? And how that can help build even what might seem like such a small thing, build someone's esteem. When I talk about the task analysis, in part, the task analysis is just that, taking a complex task and breaking it down so that people start to have success and a step by step. And I'm going to give you a funny, well, I say it's funny, a personal example of that in a little bit.
And I just remember, this is a quick takeaway from, my son coming back from work and saying, one time, it was months after being in the job, he was like, wow, didn't think I'd ever be able to talk to customers, because he dealt with a lot of like social anxiety and things like that. And he was like, when I put on my work hat, like my work, he didn't call it that, but like when he gets in that mode, he's like, I can actually like answer questions and talk to customers. So it's kind of like that surprising, like people on the job site find themselves surprised by things that they're new parts of their identity to try on. And it's kind of where people articulate those kinds of things connected to
Well,
employment.
and that's a really, I mean, I've heard you talk about Christian many times, and that, from what I know of what you said, I don't know him personally, is a really big deal for him, from things of what I've known, what you've told me about him, right? Being able to, wow, I can answer customers' questions. I can engage with people, right? It's life, it's transformative. So the last bullet here, and it's in red, says be careful not to contribute to this sense of learned helplessness, because we're not immune from this just because we have good intentions and work in the field. It can be really, again, the person that's well intended, that's doing the work for the person, is contributing to learned helplessness. Do they intend to do that? I'm sure, I would bet most people don't. So sometimes as professionals, right, we could unintentionally contribute to this sense of learned helplessness, right? One prime example I always talk about, and we've kind of talked about it a little bit from my own job coach days, is when, as a job coach speaks for the person when the person, the participant, the supported employee, whatever title you want to give them, is right there. I remember like an employer saying to me in a restaurant once, and he would do this all the time. And I was brand new, and even then I knew it wasn't. So he would say, "Hey, Jeff, can you tell Roger to go get those trays and bring them back?" Roger's standing right next to me. And so in that moment, I can be super job coach in my mind. It's not really. And like, yeah, sure, I'll go tell him. Because that's easier, right? Just to do what he says. But the harder part is to say, how do we preserve Roger's dignity? How do we, you all said teach, educate. How do we educate in a way that's still gonna, you have to preserve that relationship with that employer. And so something like, hey, Roger, I don't know if you heard what Joe said. Joe, can you say that once more so Roger hears it directly from you, or whatever, thinking about how we respond in these situations. Because it's easy to just knee jerk, oh, yeah, I'll go tell him, but it's harder sometimes to do some of the things actively that we need to do, right? And again, it's considering the impact of all of these things that we do on the person we serve, right? And the message it sends to the employer partner and to anyone that's watching, right? And in contrast to sort of some of the language we might use, thinking about the intentional use of empowering language and empowering actions can really inspire self-confidence and independence, kind of like what you were just saying, Nadine. All right. So in the chat, I want you to take a minute, and I want you, this sort of relates to our concept of learned helplessness a little bit here. Take a minute and think about something that you can't do. What is something you can't do? So that's the I can't. Something you can't do. There's an artichoke here. Any seasoned veterans of these trainings know why? We'll get to it. Every image I use just about has a purpose and a meaning. Might be kind of obscure, but it's there. What's something you can't do? Yeah, the layers, right. A lot of people, that's the first thing a lot of people say. You peel back the leaves of that artichoke, right? What's at the center? It's the heart, right? It's what really matters, what's so important. And this is one of those that jumps out at me. Do the interview for the participant. Well, yeah, we shouldn't do that. Yeah. What's something you yourself can't do? I'll give you an example. Best buddies, whoever you are. I can't eat just one cookie. There you go. Scuba dive, sing, you got it. Can't whistle. I can't whistle either, believe it or not. All these years, I cannot do it. Maybe okay, hold that thought. Anything else? All right.
Ooh, do a
So
cartwheel anymore.
I never could, Pam. I never could. I am so not coordinated. Touch your toes.
Yeah. Oh, wink
What else?
without scrunching my entire face.
Wait, now I gotta try that.
I can't wink with my right eye. I can only wink with my left eye.
I don't know. Did I scrunch
Like
my
I make a
face?
funny face when I try.
A little bit. All right. Okay. So let's now, what I want us to do here, thanks for doing that, and feel free to type more if you think of them. Um, Take a second now and take your I can't or anyone's I can't, and fill in the blank here. I can if, right? So any of you, I can't sing, I can if. I can't scuba dive, I can if, right? Any, take a second and try to do that. Turn it into an I can. Oh, I can touch my toes if I stretch properly and often. Yeah. Yeah, I was going to touch that one, Nicole. That's all you. That's all on you. But yeah, it's a great example.
I can if it's a really big cookie.
I'd love them. If it's a really big cookie, you can. Oh, right, because it's just one cookie. There you go. That's how we define things, right? I can juggle if I concentrate. Interesting. Any other I cans? And I'll give you my own example. Yeah, I can't speak different languages. I can if I take the time to practice and study, right? I hear these commercials late at night when I can't sleep about what is it? The thing you can buy, Babbel, where you can learn languages, and Rosetta Stone. I often wonder how that works. But I can if I practice. And as someone that used to speak Spanish very fluently, I know how important that practice was. So I'll give you my example. Well, no, why don't you read Matthew's? And I like your examples here. You see Matthew's example, Adine?
Oh, I can eat pineapple pizza if I take the pineapple off.
Hey, that's clever, right?
Uh,
It might still taste like pineapple. That's a whole other thing. It's like my brother doesn't like tomatoes, and we'd say, "Well, pick them out." And he says, "Yeah, the whole salad tastes like tomatoes," but that has nothing to do with anything, which is okay. So my example is, and it's a kind of a profound one, is 15 years ago. I don't know. Maybe I keep saying 15, so maybe now it's 17, 18. I don't even remember anymore. I would have said I can't do public speaking. And like people that know me now are like, what are you talking about? Right. And I genuinely had, you know, a phobia, if I can use that word, not to use that word too loosely, of, kind of speaking in front of people, speaking in groups. I really remember that. I remember being in grad school and having to come in and do a presentation and freaking out before. But here's the I can if, and I didn't think of it in these terms, but this is exactly what happened. I can engage in public speaking if, and these as a new public speaker several years ago, these are things I did. I practice at home in front of a mirror. I used to actually do that when I lived in my little one-bedroom apartment by myself years ago. I can public speak if I script out in advance what I want to say. I can public speak if I break down my speech into parts or sections, such as today I'm going to tell you 5 things you need to know about job development. That was a tip, by the way, that I learned early on. I don't really do that now, but they said break it down, right? So you see a beginning and an end. And then this is the part that's a bit more art, right? I can public speak if someone believes in and supports me. When I used to start as a trainer, first time I was doing training kind of like this many years ago, you know, I would follow a seasoned trainer around, like doing the training, and that was something they did where I used to work. And kind of see how he does the training. I would write down every single thing he said, like to the point where it was sort of ridiculous, because obviously I'm not going to say everything he says, but those notes, studying those notes, made me more comfortable, right? I don't have to do those things anymore because it starts to come naturally to me, right? So it's sort of testament to the I can if applies to so many of us, right? That if someone believes in us, there are things we can do to help overcome the I can't. And for people we support, there might be a lot of I can'ts that they have in their own heads or the messages that they've been given over the years as well. Oh, parallel
Jeffrey,
parking. Go ahead, yeah.
I think this is where the importance of looking at their job preferences and interests come into play, though, because I can tell you, I'm a lot more successful with things when they match up with like something I really feel compelled to want to do or feel motivated because there's a reason why. So I think sometimes that might be the indication if you have somebody who just, that if they're not wanting to do the things at work, sometimes maybe it's not articulated that it's more about the job match and maybe it just doesn't line up with the job they want to land at, and that's okay for a period of time, but are we exploring how it matches up with their preferences and interests? And is it the best job match ultimately?
Those passions. And I don't want anyone to get the idea here that I'm saying everyone can do everything if you just set your mind to it. That is completely false. I
I
can't
didn't
do
think you were
everything.
saying that.
Well, and I know you weren't. No, I know you weren't. You're right, and so, but there may be pieces, maybe the person that says I can't sing, and maybe truly even with lessons, you might get a little better, but you're not going to be, I don't know, Barbara Streisand, right? But the reality is, if you like that enough and that's important to you, there might be something related to that. Maybe it's a transferable skill. Maybe it's something about work culture, the industry, or what you want to be around. Even if it's not, I'm going to be, a singer, or I'm going to be a vet tech, right? There could be something else related to that that we may discover, truly discover along the way. So thank you for putting yourselves out there with all of that. So there's a picture of a hammer here and a nail and a little quote. If the only tool you have is a hammer, everything begins to look like a nail. I know this is one of my overused metaphors in practically every training, but we need a lot of tools, right? So much of this really leads us to that realization that as a job coach, you need many tools in your toolkit, right? Our job, I was saying this, Dean and I went through this yesterday a little bit and we're chit-chatting and I said, the job of the job coach isn't just to tell someone how and when to put the cans on the shelf. I'm using a real concrete example. That's maybe a piece of it, but there's so much more, and so maybe you are that new job coach, which apparently 50% of you are, if the figures were correct in the poll, or maybe you're that seasoned veteran who's been around a while. And I know a few of you here have certainly been around a while, right? Maybe you're that new supervisor, maybe you're an experienced manager. No matter what seat you sit in, there's numerous skills, there's assets, there's abilities, and there's a lot of acquired knowledge and applied knowledge that really do contribute to our success as job coaches, right? And so it's just that reminder that we have to have some sense of, we need to have different tips, strategies, experiences to be that effective job coach. So I'll go over a few of those elements that might be in what we might call someone's training plan, right? Some of the tools. What are the knowledge, skills, and abilities you need as a job coach that will promote a more person-centered approach to teaching and training, right? To help meet the unique needs of people we support, while also continuing to preserve their dignity, right? While also continuing to support the employer and that integration. The integration is certainly about the job seeker, but it's also supporting the business as well and sending a message to the community. So I'm going to go over just kind of it's a really quick overview of a few of the key components of what we might call a training plan, right? Some of those key elements, those necessary tools and skills for what I call the essential job coach, right? And one is, this might be the vaguest one here, the life pivot points, right? It's what I kind of said before. It's that step from maybe never working or never having a job or having limited work experience or maybe negative work experience to holding that first job, right? To becoming that vocational being that maybe people didn't think you could or would be. That step to that job is a really big step. I guess for any of us, that first job or those first jobs are a really big deal. For someone that maybe didn't necessarily have the message that work was important and something they should do, it's going to become an even bigger deal, right? So just think about those first days of work. Also with, those life pivot points, what else in their life is going on? I've had people that have other services and supports. Maybe they have day support, or day services. And, I would have conversations even before all this about what's the impact going to be on the rest of your life? Where are you prioritizing work in the grand scheme of things? I would hope, if we think employment first and the value of employment, that, just like any of us, kind of my extracurricular activities, those other things that I do recreationally, I kind of wrap them around my work, right? So that I'm as available and flexible as possible for work. Starting to have some of those conversations with people so that they understand that as well.
There's a comment about
Oh, yeah.
often participants reach out to us about non-employment related pivot points, life pivot
Mhm.
points,
Mhm.
which we know is the case sometimes when we become that trusted person that you may find some things. And what's your response to that, Jeffrey, in terms of um, just being clear with yourself and with them about boundary setting and when do those outside things fall within your role as a job coach, and how do you delineate when they don't?
I love this one because I'm going to give my answer. Best buddies can speak up and give their, redirect the witness if my friends would like to. But what I often would say is, when I was used to be in person more with people, I'd say, do you ever do, as job developer, job coach, whatever, employment professional, do you ever feel like you're doing work that may not on the surface seem directly work or vocationally related? And every single person raises their hand, right? Because I think we know that in order for someone to be successful, there might be other types of things and supports people need in their life. Now, having said that, we have to know our role. Is there someone else in their life or another service or support that can do that, that will do that? And sometimes I found that, I may be one of the first people they ever interact with, from the sort of world of helping or social work or human services, right? And so, there have been times in my past work life where there would be things that I would do to help someone. Maybe it was indirectly related to work, taking them to shop for something they might need for work because no one else could do that. I remember, and I'm not advising you do this, but I'll give you an example years ago. A couple of my I was in my direct role at the time, and a couple of our really experienced job developers, amazing people. Um, After the fact, like it was like Monday, so came in and said, "Hey Jeff, we had to help. Teresa and I went and helped Tanya move this weekend." I said, "Oh, why'd you do that?" Well, she was in a domestic violence situation. She had no one else, and we just did it. And so I say that to say that I'm not saying you do or don't do that, but what I'm saying is that there may be times that there are other types of things because we know if we were to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if we don't have some of our base needs met, it's going to be really hard to move up to being successful in employment, right? That sense of belonging that comes with work, right? So whether it's us or whether it's someone else, there are non-work related things that will come up, and we have to be able to handle it, whoever that might be.
I think sometimes too, it's a result of people having trouble differentiating, and it falls kind of loosely under social skills, but like boundary setting. And I've seen it sometimes approached as more of an activity based where you can actually turn it into an activity of identifying categories of things and types of topics that you talk about. Who do you talk about this topic with? And you can really just literally start with having them brainstorm. There's no wrong answer. What kinds of things, like what's on your mind? What problems do you have? Whatever. And you can put them each in circles so that they can then separate them out and identify this is the Jeffrey circle or job coach circle, or this is what you talk to best buddies about. And then over here is, hey, a therapist, and we'll help you
Yeah.
connect with somebody. And here's what you talk to mom and dad about. Here's what you talk to a friend about. So that's another way, because with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, you might just need to do some more direct and concrete teaching to separate out what they're talking to you about.
Absolutely. Thanks, AD. We want to, someone earlier, more than one of you mentioned integration and inclusion. I know they sound like buzzwords, but they are why we do what we do, right? And this is the constant, right? It should be considered in everything we do, as I kind of said before, everything we say and message to the individual, participant, the employer, to coworkers, right? And particularly when we start to help them if they need it, not everyone will, to discover and engage with those coworkers, those natural supports at work, right? It's all about, someone can be physically integrated in a job, working aside people who don't have disabilities for at least a commensurate wage. That's kind of the formal definition of integration. But not socially included, right? Still socially isolated. So there's it's like a continuum to me as well. I probably won't get to this today. I did a whole training on this. I want to say it was back in March and probably will again. But accommodations in the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, right? A crucial role of the job coach is to observe, support, and maybe suggest job site accommodations that might be needed that, because what's an accommodation? It's an alternate method of getting the work done, right? Or accessing the benefits and privileges of employment. What do I mean by benefits and privileges of employment? Having access, I mean, there could be literal physical access if it's mobility to the company break room, right? Or it could be, although this isn't as much ADA, right? It could be just someone doesn't know how to navigate those relationships and has a desire to, and so how do we, ensure that someone does, I don't know, take breaks or eat lunch with people if that's the culture of that work environment. Maybe there's someone on the work site that'll come naturally to. Maybe we have to sometimes educate and orchestrate that a little bit, depending on the site as well. What's your teaching style, right? A good job coach knows how to adapt our own teaching style to the individual's preferred method of learning. So for some people, this could involve, as I mentioned earlier, maybe someone needs us to actually model how a job task is done, right? Or break down the job duties into smaller parts. That's kind of a task analysis that I mentioned. Or maybe it's developing those instructional tools like checklists and pictures, which, by the way, are essentially accommodations. Things like pictures or checklists could, in a sense, be an accommodation. So we just want to know how someone learns best, right? You have your visual learners, you have your interpersonal learners, you have people that are kinesthetic, like to move around. Doesn't mean that people can't learn in a different way, but we all kind of have our preferred methods of learning. So it's that art of job coaching, right? Is knowing how to strike that balance between how do we not offer too much support and how do we offer just enough support? And that's those systematic training techniques that we're going to go over in a little bit here, right? We've talked about natural supports, I think, at length, and there's a little part later, about us being that bridge builder. Do you have a fading plan, right? How do you know it's time to fade, right? How do you know someone's stable in their job, right? However you want to define that. Right from the start, a good job coach has to have that exit plan in mind, that plan for fading. I might even say our fading plan starts when we first meet them and start getting to know them and who they are. And no, we're not going to have a concrete plan, but we're starting to build that positive vocational profile. And so once someone's working, starting to think about how I'm going to fade because, some supports are easier to fade than others, right? If our only support is a direct verbal prompt that tells someone exactly what to do, how do we fade that, right? Maybe we fade to a less, do an indirect verbal prompt or something that's a little less, as people learn and grow. But thinking about that fading, doing the work, that example you all gave before of what a job coach doesn't do is going to make it that much harder to fade, among other reasons. A good job coach has to have solid record keeping skills, right? That is a part of the essential job coach, right? Maybe it's completing the required reporting and documentation to your funding partners, right? On the employee's progress, right? The best job coaches will have excellent communication, good interpersonal skills as well. Career growth and advancement. I didn't mention that, but when I talked about RSA, the Rehabilitation Services Administration's the federal government definition of integration. So for a long time, it's been making a commensurate wage, minimum wage or higher, the wage that people make in that job is one. The other is integration, working aside people without disabilities. The other thing in recent years that they've really, really stressed is opportunities for career growth and advancement, right? So, how are we and how is the person and how is their employer fostering and promoting those opportunities for growth and advancement in their work, as a part of any good competitive integrated employment experience, right? As that savvy job coach, we want to pay attention to opportunities for their own professional development. that they might participate in as well. Now, growth and advancement doesn't have to always mean I get a raise or I move up to another job higher up the ladder, although it certainly can be that. Could just be cross training. It could be trying out something new, developing a new skill, right? Is a part of it because we want to avoid, that revolving door of jobs that can happen sometimes. And so that opportunities for growth and advancement also promote job retention when we see that there's possibilities. And I was talking about this before we started the training with Chris and Alex and Nadine. Your relationship, right? Your employer relationships, right? This is the really, as a job coach, your relationship with the employer partner and the employee you support, of course, that's a given. But with the employer is so important because we don't only represent the employee in our own organization, I often say, but we really do. It's a big task because we also represent, in some ways, our entire field of employment services through how we interact with the employer through all of our actions, right? Through that professionalism we demonstrate in the employment world. You ever go into a business, for those of you that are job developers or whatever, and have a business say, oh yeah, we worked with a program like yours once before. It really didn't work out for us. Guess what? They've put us in, not fair, into this box that everyone's the same and all employment programs are the same, right? Everything you do matters in your interactions and with employers and supported employees, coworkers, colleagues. So the image here has the job coach at the middle, right? Because especially early on, we might be the bridge to certainly the employee, right? Certainly to the business. We're the bridge to the business, we're the face of our organization. Here it says voc rehab counselor. I will say whoever your funding partner is, whether it's vocational rehabilitation or someone else, right? We're also the liaison to them as well and to the natural supports at work. Now, I used to have this, there's a little red line between the employee and the natural supports. I used to not have that there, but then I realized without that red arrow between employee and natural supports, it indicates that we are the bridge to natural supports forever. And that couldn't be further from the truth, right? We pave the way for those natural supports sometimes to help the person access them. And then, this is a part of the fading, right? We get out of the way. Because with strong natural supports, they are what will promote job retention for all of us. Think about some of your examples you gave before. So there's a picture, a very colorful picture of a peacock on the screen, and I want to take just one final second to sort of establish that importance in our work of the job coach, right? Sometimes I'll hear job coaches downplay their role. I've heard job coaches say, especially if they compare their role to, say, a job developer, if they aren't job developers. I've heard job coaches say, oh yeah, I'm just a job coach, right? I don't do that job development stuff, there's this sort of informal pecking order. But I really hope that I want to highlight here, and I think I've done it partly because I just told you a whole mess of things about the importance of job coaching, so your head is probably spinning. But, hopefully in our short time together today, I can highlight the important role that you play in not only supporting the success of the employee, but your role as an employment service professional in building relationships, maintaining relationships, and sustaining those relationships with our employer partners. So I always say, replace the I'm just a job coach with, and this is why I talk about the essential job coach, right? And the peacock's up there because as job coaches, it's really important to value and take pride in the essential role we play and to not minimize it and not think it's important. Okay, so let's talk a minute about teaching and training techniques. This is kind of the meat and potatoes, the heart of the matter of when we think about job coaching, we think about different styles, different strategies, about training, about teaching, about coaching. We all have our own style, and that's great. But it's important to have a variety of tools again, right? Because if I only have that one tool, the hammer, everything's going to look like a nail, right? If I'm a visual learner and my one tip is I'll create checklists, that's great. But what if that doesn't work for someone? We have to have other ways to go about things. But I mentioned before the concept of a task analysis, right? Has anyone here ever done a task analysis? Essentially, what a task analysis is that it breaks down an activity. In our case, it would be, well, someone employed, it would be a job task, right? Into smaller discrete steps, right? And the whole idea is that as we break that down, it allows the learner, the employee, whomever, to develop complex skills that would otherwise be difficult to acquire, right? And it helps, kind of like Adine was saying before, although you didn't call it task analysis. As we break things down, it helps people build confidence, build competence, right? Feel good about themselves. It takes the I can't and can help move it into and I can. And so I'm going to share an example. So I mentioned earlier that I had gone through this larger job coaching class that I do with a fine-tooth comb, and I made some updates a few months ago. Well, I got to this slide, not this slide, but a similar slide on task analysis. And I realized that I was like, I need to find a way to bring some of my own personal experiences and relevance to this concept of task analysis. The one example I always used to use, and there's nothing wrong with this example, is making a task analysis of how you would make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I bet some of you have done that. I actually used to, when I used to do in-person training, have peanut butter and jelly with me, and I'd ask the group to tell me how to make it. And it would be hilarious because they would miss a step and it would seem obvious, but it wasn't obvious. And so I came up with my own example. And so there's an image on this slide of, you may not be able to tell what it is, but I will explain. So, and actually I was creating this, putting this together in January. So there's this image on the slide, and what it is there's one is yellow and one is green, and it's what's called, General Electric back in the 70s made these, essentially they're fancy old Christmas tree lights, and they're called lighted bells. So they're like little glittery bells with like a nightlight bulb stuck in them, for lack of a better description, right? And they come in a few different colors. They have lots of glitter on them. Oh, I even have a couple here. Wait a minute. I'm holding up a couple of examples. I'm such a dork. Look, I got a blue one and I got a green one. So, unfortunately, one of the things I discovered is that very few of these lighted bells that I own were, I'm sorry, very few worked. A lot of them were burned out. There's a little light bulb inside, and it was burned out. And so, and they're pretty expensive if you look for them on eBay or on Etsy or whatever. There's all these, how like on Facebook and internet, there's all these groups of experts. And there's what you would call vintage lighting mavens, like people that are all into old lights, right? And so I was reading something, and they're talking in this one group about relamping, they quote unquote, these old lights to get them working again. And I want to add, and this is the learned helplessness part. This is the I can't. I want to add that I have zero, pretty much zero, and I can say this about myself, technical or mechanical ability. I can't fix anything, and so my fine motor skills are probably leave something to be desired. So my first thought at relamping these, getting these working again was absolutely not. I'm not going to be able to do it. So, I found some Facebook groups where people were using all these big words and fancy language and talking about using this tool or that tool that I never heard of, or saying it's easy. All you have to do is this, this, and this. Well, I completely shut down because it was overwhelming to me. Again, there's the I can't. But then somewhere directed me to this YouTube video. And I think a lot of us know how instructive YouTube videos can be, some of them anyway. And so this man in the YouTube video broke it down into smaller discrete steps that I could understand. He spoke very slowly. He used plain language. He didn't use any fancy words when it came to lighting. And I started thinking, gee, this might actually be something I can do. So I'm going to show you a very quick version of kind of what I went through here. So on the screen here, there's a picture of a whole bunch of those bells, right? These are burned out. And the tip that I'm showing here, there's a picture of the tip going into the glittery bells. I knew that somehow these burnout bulbs, which were firmly glued in for the past 50 years, somehow had to come out. I had the slightest idea how to do that without breaking the bell. So this video, one of the things that he talked me through was soak it in water for 5 minutes. There's a picture of it doing that. Pour a little water into the top of the bell, let it soak for 5 minutes, and then gently wiggle it after 5 or 10 minutes, and the bulb will come out. Well, wouldn't you know, there's pictures here of an orange one and a blue one with all the old yucky glue that came out of the bell. And I knew I had to have my supplies because a part of a good task analysis is knowing what you need. And there's pictures of these old GE Christmas lights that I happen to have in my attic. So I knew I had those to use. And the final picture is a picture of them on my tree. You know, it's a very down, quick task analysis. And so I share all this to say that in my example, I started from a place of I can't, I won't be able to do this. And the reality was with a little explanation, with a little patience, with someone teaching me and helping me break it down into its component steps, I figured it out. And I'll tell you that I love this example because it doesn't have to be a person with a disability that we're supporting on a job site, although certainly a task analysis can help with them. The reality is for any of us, if someone is teaching us in a way that we can understand and learn, we can accomplish things. And I'll tell you, I actually felt really good about myself. I almost can't wait for more to burn out so I can do it again. I actually created this formal kind of list of the steps you might go through to relamp these bells. I'm not going to read them all to you, but essentially it goes from gathering your supplies, pouring the water, and it just breaks it down step by step, soaking it in the water, loosening it, gently wiggling it. The hardest part because I was afraid of breaking the bell, drying it off, gluing them back in and letting them dry overnight, right? And so think about a task or someone you're working with, right, who maybe is struggling with something. Maybe the task is too complex. Maybe it's something they're not sure they can do. Maybe we're not sure they can do, right? The heart of the matter here is that let's revisit our earlier conversation, right? I would have said, I can't do this task of relamping these bells. But with natural supports, right? In my case, it was the video and someone telling me how to do it. With that encouragement, with the broken down task analysis of the steps in language I understood, I was able to successfully accomplish a task. It really did build my own confidence in my esteem as well. It really was for me when I was sort of applying this to the concept of job coaching, a light bulb moment. That's my really bad dad joke, right? A light bulb moment that kind of went off in my head because for me, I was able to connect the concepts of job coaching to discussions that we have every day, in this work, And so again, it's just that reminder that these concepts can apply to all of us and to any of us. Someone says here, well, that's why we always have to improve our task analysis. Missing the important step of making certain light string is not plugged into the wall. Sometimes you have to. Well, yeah, right. When you're sticking it in water, you better not have it in there doing a smiley face, right? Of course, when you're testing it after, one of the steps would be to make sure it's plugged in and that they're working. So a few things to think about. And there's a picture here again of the bladed bells, right? First of all, many coaches confuse the job analysis, which is looking at the whole job, which I do talk about sometimes, with the task analysis, right? A task analysis is one component of a job, right? One task. It's not the entire job. So let's use my example to keep to this theme of getting the house decorated for the holidays. Let's use that example. Decorating that entire tree, Christmas tree, in my example, may take a job analysis, right? It's a large task. It has multiple steps, and everyone might do it differently. But ensuring that these lights, these old vintage lights, are working would utilize the task analysis approach, right? Breaking it down into those steps, and then following them one by one. And a task analysis really can be useful when you're working with someone who's maybe stuck, having difficulty with a particular task. And a few things we want to think about. I talk about natural cues. It's also a strategy we use when we're coaching versus contrived cues. When we have a task analysis or any task, we want to make sure that there's a natural cue so that, because if we become, a contrived cue would be the job coach tells you what to do, a direct verbal prompt, right? Versus a natural cue might be maybe it's a timer or a buzzer or something that lights up. Maybe the natural cue is just others start engaging in activity, or everyone gets up from the break room because break is over, right? Or I look at the clock and it says 12 o'clock. I know that means time for lunch, right? They happen without anything having to happen, right? So as much as possible, that's one of those strategies that we talk about is we want to have as many natural cues as job coaches built in versus are becoming that cue, something that won't always be there. What is the task? This is the big picture thing when it comes to job satisfaction, task completion. What does the task look like if it's done correctly, right? We can't always assume that someone's going to know what the task will look like at the other end if we're asking someone to do something. So in my case, having a video with images of what to do each step of the way really made a huge difference. It built my confidence and it talked me through all the steps. We also want to know when we're thinking of any task, what does the person currently understand about the task, right? Because everyone's going to be at a different place. Some of us might have much more knowledge. Some of us might have no knowledge of how to do something. I was pretty low on the knowledge level when it came to relamping these lights, right? In my case, I guess I would say I had a basic foundational knowledge. I understood the light was burnt out. I understood that that little night light bulb, they call it C7, that's the size, C7.5. I knew that that needed to come out and be replaced, but it was the how do I do it that stumped me, right? Again, I had a little bit of learned helplessness kick in. So where is the person in the process? What do they know already about the task? Where does it fit into the full cycle, right? In my example, I clearly understood that in my case, in order to use these lights, I knew a repair was needed, or I needed to buy expensive new ones, right? Or substitute something else. Same with, I always say with anyone's job. Do they understand? My son's in a job now, he's been in for a few months and they're doing inventory sometimes when he's not, it's in a retail establishment. And so in the job of doing inventory at midnight or whatever time he's doing that at would be a good question. When he gets frustrated about doing that job and the detail, do you understand where this fits into the full cycle? How important this is to making sure that the shelves are stocked? The person that, I don't care what your job is, you're doing the French fries at the fast food restaurant. Do you understand? My family runs a restaurant, so I get this. Do you understand that the importance of that job means that people get their food hot, right? Or fully cooked, right? It improves the business, it makes your employer happy. So let's talk here for a few minutes about what I mentioned a couple times here. And I think this is often what we think about, which are those systematic training techniques. You have an entire resource to this effect that we will send you. But if you're a good job coach knows that you'll use these different training techniques that we want to adapt to the supported employees level of support as needed. Again, if we only have a hammer, we're only going to see everything as a nail. If we only know direct verbal prompts, right? If that's the main thing that we do, that may or may not make sense. There may be examples where someone doesn't need that level of support and may need something a little less, right? Some examples might be, when do we use that verbal cue? When do we shadow and observe? When do we fade back supports? I know sometimes you might think, well, and I know this sometimes was my reality as a job coach. Well, in the beginning, it's always doing verbal cues and then I'll shadow and fade back. And that's how fading works. There could be examples where someone may not really need that level of support, right? And I always would say, start with the level of support that's a little less. Appropriate to the person, can always increase the support. If we offer too much support at first, sometimes it's a bit harder to back up. And things like natural cues or using pictures or, shadowing where we're observing someone from a distance also tend to enhance someone's independence and dignity, if I can use that word. Not that it's undignified to have a job coach doing direct verbal cues, but right, we want to send that message of letting people be as independent as they can. So the science of job coaching is this slide in the resource that we'll share with you, right? It's having best practices, it's having tools in place, and it's knowing maybe it's even knowing what the research says, about, working independently and motivation, because there is a piece of that. But that art of job coaching is knowing how do you strike that balance between not offering too much and not offering too little? Because what happens when you offer too much support? It can foster dependence, right? Or that message that somehow you can't do something. And it hinders or gets in the way of inclusion by doing too much. While too little support can leave the person floundering, vulnerable, unprepared, right? There's no best answer. Every person is different. There's no one size fits all. So I'm going to just hyperlink to this document quickly here. I got about 20 minutes left. Hold on. So we will send this to you afterwards. I don't think we send it to you. I think we're sending it to you after the class. And so again, there's the list of all of the systematic training techniques, from the least, hands-on or invasive, which might be natural cues, all the way down to, modeling, where we're modeling job tasks for someone, or, hand over hand, which may not happen all the time and never touch anyone without their permission, but there could be a time and a place for that, right? So example of natural cues. There's a picture here of a meat thermometer. When it gets to 160, the burgers are done. That's a natural cue. I, as job coach, don't need to be there, right? It makes my fading a lot easier, right? It's something in that setting that lets the trainee know, the individual know, that a particular behavior or activity needs to occur, right? There's other natural cues, and I apologize in advance. Some of these are service oriented, or most of them are. So lots of jobs people with disabilities can do. But for the sake of this conversation, there's a table here with a bunch of dirty dishes. That could be a natural cue for somebody. There's a telephone, old school telephone. Telephone ringing could be a natural cue, right? For somebody, a spill on the floor could be a natural cue. There's visual and picture cues. One of the examples here, a couple of the examples is, and this kind of gets to what does the job look like when it's done? There's a picture of a completely made up bed, like for someone that maybe, actually the very first job coaching gig I had was someone that worked at a hotel, and that is what they had to do, right? They were in housekeeping. So seeing what the employer expects, or maybe it's the table set properly, or there's a picture of these, I think they're called pot stickers in the steps. Those, visually that can really help for someone that is that visual learner as well. Shadowing, or what they sometimes call proximity. The idea is shadowing means we're just kind of, as you fade from somebody, we are shadowing, right? We might be a little bit of a distance away, just observing, giving people that time for independence. Proximity means you might be in the vicinity, right? And it is interesting. I saw something once where there were these videos, and it was a job coach, and they were at a job site. And the videos showed that when the job coach was close, like the first image here where the job coach is close, people in the work site all kind of to stay in the background and not approach the person. And then they had a video where the job coach was faded or not there. And it was interesting to see how employees, co-workers in the work site tended to be more interactive. That's the push and the pull of this work as a job coach, right? We have an important job to do. People will need us sometimes to be right there, especially early on in the job as they're learning. But at the same time, we have to think about that messaging and have that exit plan in mind. Let's see. Indirect verbal prompts is, a little less invasive than the direct verbal prompt, because an indirect verbal prompt will cue the person to perform the task, but it doesn't really explicitly state it, right? It might be an open-ended question. So like these examples here. What do you do when you arrive at work? Instead of saying, okay, when you first get at work, make sure you go to the time clock and you punch in. That's a direct verbal cue or verbal prompt. Nothing wrong with that if that's what a person needs. Or how do you add soap to the dish machine before you start? Versus, okay, there's the soap, pick it up. Now lift the lid on the soap machine, open the top and pour it in, right? That's a direct versus indirect. It presents people with just a little bit more independence, a little bit, depending on the person. This can lead us to gestures. Is that next? Those direct verbal prompts. I've talked about those. Direct verbal prompts are just what they might seem, right? They indicate what the task might be. Gestures, again, gestures can be a way, it might be thumbs up like here, could be pointing. I remember doing the sort of, I'm putting my hands down, like the quiet down or, whatever. Maybe it's just a look, right? Any parent knows the look. Any child of a parent knows the look, right? You know, some sort of physical movement that I think can also be another way without words and without drawing a lot of attention to a person. Um, Another good strategy to use, right? We have to make sure the person knows what the gesture means. And we have to make sure that they understand it. And we also have to think sometimes about our body language and that people may pick up on things unintentionally that we do or say. We've talked about modeling, which is just showing the person how the task is done. Frankly, ideally, if there's someone in the work site, a coworker, a colleague, especially early on, that can model, it's always better to have a natural support or someone in the work environment. But that could be the role of a job coach as well. And then this is physical prompts, which could be physically guiding the trainee's movement to engage in the behavior. I always say, I don't know if this is something you do or don't do, but I will say that if we're ever going to be doing something like that, we obviously need to know the person. We need to know their reaction or response to physical touch. But I'll speak for myself. Someone kicking me under the table, and I've had that happen in my work career, basically woke me up. Like, Jeffrey, I know you're about to shout out something because you're upset about what was just said. Maybe you don't want to do that right now. Or a tap on the shoulder can really go a long way for some people. You have to know the person. So this will be sent to you, but think what I like about this is just it's that pause and reflect, right? It's that pause and stop and think for a minute about what techniques that we're using and what message it might send to people in the work environment as well. It's the stop and think. Oh, so we talked about natural cues already. All right, polling question. I think we're okay. And it's about offsite support. Do you ever provide offsite, meaning not at the actual job site? I'm just looking to make sure we're on target here. Yeah, we're doing pretty good. Okay. You ever provide offsite supports? Yeah, of course. Sometimes I have questions just to get you to do something other than listen to me talk. So I'll give it another second while you respond, but I can see here that you're all saying pretty much the same thing. Again, we don't see how you respond. I don't know what you're saying. You are anonymous. All right, I'm going to end it just because we got to keep moving. And nearly everyone said, yeah, I do offsite supports, right? And so I don't know if anyone has any examples of offsite support, that you do. Feel free to share them in the chat. But I just want to remind us that support, certainly on-site support, is baked into what we do and is critically important in supported employment. But offsite supports have their place as well. And again, if there's any that you provide, feel free to share. So, few examples. Some of these sort of go to my ADA place, which is if someone has not disclosed their disability, employer contact actually is prohibited by law, right? Because we cannot disclose someone who does not want to be disclosed to their employer. I'm not sure that that's the case with anyone you necessarily work with. Tell me if I'm wrong, but it is an important point, right? That we need to understand about, on-site support and disclosure. The person has to be aware, and has to give us that permission to be on site. Let's see. Oh, I see. You're talking about offsite. Took me a minute. What do you, Adine, do you see some of those?
Yeah, pay/text paperwork, leadership
Yeah.
development, headspace tips, reset the mindset after work hours.
Yeah.
And then conversations on how to check their pay stubs, schedule time off in their work app if applicable.
Yeah. I mean, even if we're providing on-site support, the reality is that there will be maybe other off-site supports we're doing, whether it's through Zoom, whether it's through email, whether it's through texting. Maybe it's meeting at, the coffee shop to talk things through, right? I know, and this is not necessarily your case, I know people who work with people with mental health diagnoses will regularly tell me that they're working with people who are not disclosed at their workplace because they're worried about the stigma, right? And so those supports might be 100% offsite, but remote coaching, practicing making pizza with fake ingredients. Oh yeah, we used to we did this with cookie dough, but it wasn't cookie dough. It was like Play-Doh. I remember doing that once in the cash register. We had like a real cash register. I can remember practicing those things offsite as well. Great examples. Um, Offsite supports. If the employee themselves requests offsite supports, they don't want us there, right? We can talk about that. Even if they're disclosed to the employer, that's another example. And what I want to say is that, you know, this is one of those common themes, right? When there's a solid relationship between the employee that you support and you as the job coach, it really does provide for a more effective offsite support relationship. That relationship you have with the person you're job coaching is so important. Now, we were talking to Chris before and Alex, and I know this. It is not always possible. There are times we have to step in where we don't know somebody, someone leaves their job, something happens, something suddenly comes up, right? Someone is sick and out, and we have to step in, right? I totally recognize that. But the reality is, the more maybe we used to have like this primary and secondary meaning. I might be the primary job coach, but I'll bring a dean to meet you because if I'm out on vacation or heaven forbid leave my job, a dean will have a little knowledge and not be a stranger, right? Just again, thinking about those relationships as well. Oh,
It looks
go
like
ahead.
also some of the social skill development, which is a good point, that oftentimes it's more comfortable for people to work on those things offsite. And I agree. I have had, even not being the job coach, being in the role of helping somebody to develop their social skills, have done some social scripting, or hey, let's pretend I'm a colleague. Help me figure out a colleague you'd like to get to know better that maybe you'd want to invite to coffee. Now let's practice. Ask me to coffee. How do you do that in a natural way? So those social aspects of job coaching can be done offsite too. And practicing money handling and money saving tips.
Yeah, all the above. Great examples. Thank you. I'm not going to. This slide says what key indicators tell you that you belong and matter at work. Feel free to type them in. I'm going to keep going, but I want you to think about what are the things that tell you you belong, that you matter. Kind of brings us back partly to our first job, but not exclusively to that. And I love role playing, Andrew. It is great. By the way, as job developers, we should be role playing our job development speech too. We're not off the hook. Told you all roads lead to job development. So think about what tells you you belong at work. What tells you you matter at work? And feel free to type anything into about that. But I want to remind us that, and Paul Wayman was really one of the pioneers in supported employment, still out there at Virginia Commonwealth University, fighting the good fight. But Paul Wayman has done a lot of work on this concept of natural supports. And he talks about, natural supports aren't inevitable. There could be resistance from coworkers, or maybe it's just difficulty locating the natural support at the job site. Sometimes when we talk about the concept of natural supports, people say, well, then why do they need us? They don't need a job coach. And the reality is just because the support exists doesn't mean that there isn't other work that we have to do, or doesn't mean someone even knows how to navigate it, to locate it. Think about how we've learned about worksite relationships. I bet if many of us were to rewind to past jobs, depending on where you're at in your work career, I learned on site. I learned through the good, the bad, and the ugly. Things I did well, things I learned that I didn't do well, reactions of other people, right? And so they don't always just come naturally. And sometimes people with obvious disabilities, sometimes, might experience people who aren't so sure, right? Aren't sure that they want to interact or if they should interact, right? Oh, I see more examples here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Becca had a response, I think, to the how do you know
Yeah.
you matter at work.
Oh,
Inclusion by colleagues, managers, comfortable conversations during work hours, gaining more responsibilities and new
mhm.
tasks, positive annual reviews and feedback, and conversations with managers.
That is a
So
A
really
plus
good.
list, Becca. It's and better than how I do my list in 1 minute that you typed that. So thank you. And
Well,
by the way,
and I,
go ahead.
oh, sorry. And I
No, you go.
think a good question is how often do some of those things not get offered to somebody with a disability? So, you know,
Yeah.
what can we do to some of those things that we take for granted? Are there ways we can make that more, those kinds of things more accessible to individuals?
Yeah, great examples. So natural supports. There's supports, you know, this is sort of the definition to get us thinking about it. I think we know and we do know, but you can always know a little deeper, right? Can always go a little deeper. Maybe that's our artichoke moment. There are supports from supervisors, from coworkers. They might be mentoring, they might be friendship, socializing at breaks, before or after work, giving feedback on job performance, as Becca just said, right? Maybe it's learning a new skill with a coworker or colleague helping us out, right? They also, they're really effective because they also enhance the communication and social integration between the employee with a disability and their coworkers, right? Kind of promote inclusion, not just integration into a job, but true inclusion, which might be social inclusion. And they're just more permanent, they're more readily available, right? I mean, people may have friends and family offsite. I call them the external natural supports, right? You know, they're supportive of the employee, they're relationship based, they're facilitated, they're cultivated internally. There is an element of them happening naturally. And in supported employment, it's really consistent with the values, right? It's not just getting a job, right? Part of getting a job is keeping the job, and job retention is very much related to the concept of natural supports. So, this is I'm not going to get into all of what ACRE is other than to share with you these ACRE competencies. These are essentially ACRE's Association for Community Rehab Educators. People like Aideen and I that do training all the time. There's this national member organization for trainers that do this very work we do. And this was pulled from the ACRE stuff, is some of the key concepts when it comes to fading, right? And so I think we've covered a lot of these, you know, looking at and modeling solution-focused interactions with the employee, which other people at the workplace can learn from. We're facilitating training by coworkers, not just us. Supports that promote inclusion, and we've talked about that. Facilitating mentor relationships between employee and coworkers. Sometimes it might be doing training on diversity and inclusion, not all the time, but it might be educating on certain disabilities or a person we're working with. And then, of course, that ability to fade and have those natural supports, you know, uh, take over, paving the way. Um, so a fun slide here. I talked about fading, and there is a resource we'll send you on fading gracefully, right? There is an art to this as well. And just a few pitfalls that I bet anyone here has fallen into at some point in time. And I'll just give a few examples. One is boredom, right? Sometimes, especially that shadowing can be a little boring, right? You're just passively observing. And so maybe the person that does the work with the person is bored, and doing the work with the person or giving prompts is something to do. Bad idea. It's not about us. It's about what's best for the individual. Sometimes an additional person, as that other person on the scene, the company, if we're not careful, might see us as, oh, I can give Jeff some work, right? 2 for 1. Being careful not to fall in that trap, right? Even if we do it sort of willingly. Training job satisfaction. Sometimes, especially as we're starting to fade, maybe the person this would be the participant, the employee, something might suddenly come up because they don't want us to leave. I've had this happen as well, being aware of that. Some job coaches may do parts of the job for the employee or with the employee. Again, we're not coworkers. We don't want to fall into that coworker role. We can give unconscious cues, you know, and someone might be able to read us. Maybe if someone gets to know us, this is the other side of the coin with relationships. They may look at a look, you know, or our body language and read that and wait for us to respond to that or respond according to that, right? That's not a natural cue. It can become an unnatural cue. We might like the job sites we work at and not want to fade or visit them more often or provide more support than we normally would. I can think of job sites in my past work life that I loved visiting and maybe was guilty of visiting a little more than I should have, right? And just, it can be hard not to be that employee, right? It can be hard to just sort of hang around. I say hang around, even though we're observing, right? And so we just want to be careful about that as well. All right. So we got a couple minutes left. And this is the last, and I see a couple comments here. I can hang on a minute, but I'm going to put this out there to all of you. The final chat question is, and I often talk about going from good to great, right? And there's a picture here of kind of I guess you'd call it a Greek god. His name is Mediocrities, obviously not a real person. And it says good enough. So, you know, the essential job, well, the job coach can be just enough, right? To get the job done. A mediocre job. I've seen that. I've seen good. I've seen bad. I've seen somewhere in between. But let's not be that mediocrity. So as a result of today, I mean, I know we talked about a lot. What might be something I don't know, you do less of, you do more of, you start doing? Sometimes I talk about what did we relearn? Because some of us have been around a little while. What do we need to unlearn? What might be something you'll do differently? What might be something you'll just think about a little bit more? So I'll ask you to type in your response to that, and that'll be your ticket out of here today. What are your thoughts, your final thoughts? Oh, and I see Kim's question comment. When trying to
Yeah.
find natural supports, I ask managers who on your staff remembers everyone's birthday, who invites shy people to sit with them. Yeah, who are those key roles? It's that you have to be very observant in that role. Absolutely, Kim. Try well, Matthew, and I appreciate your saying being less of a 2-for-1 because I know we all want to say we won't do it, we don't do it. That wouldn't be me, those fading pitfalls. Something on that list of fading pitfalls we've all done. And if we're honest with ourselves, right? It can be easier said than done. More of what Kim said. Yeah. More Kim, more Kim. What else we got, Aideen?
That is, it's, oh wait, less direct task assistance, do more offsite advocacy to get more self-confidence for participants. Motivational SMART goals will help them stay engaged, more communicating.
All right. Well, you are all free to go unless you have something else you'd like to share. Oh, Aideen's agenda mapping worksheet. I'll have to click that one. I don't know that one.
Yeah, it's an example of one. That's in a book. There are free ones. I found that one quick. Look up agenda mapping if you want to do the brain dump in circles. It's called agenda mapping in motivational interviewing. Or send me an email. I have one downloaded that I can send you.
Thank you all. And I agree, Nicole. Well, Nicole says, and you're all free to go because I know we're a minute over. This training would be great for employers to understand why and how we coach the way we do. I agree with you. Like, and maybe the lesson is what can you take from this as you educate and talk to employers about what your role is, right? Being clear, because I think sometimes we assume people know what job coaching is and they don't, right? They don't. It's not doing for, it's supporting, it's supplementing. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for